I want to tell you something that no one told me before my first solo adventure. Not packing advice, not safety tips, not which apps to download, something a little bit more personal. I was in my early 20s, engineer, working in land development. It was the first role that I had got outside of university. I'd been in the role for about 6 months until one day I found myself sitting at my desk, looking around and thinking, wow, is this it? Is this where I've landed for the next 30, 40, 50 years? It was a thought that did not go away. It stuck with me. It stuck with me until one day I made a decision. A decision that I didn't fully understand at the time, but one that I knew I needed to act on. And the decision was that I was going to leave. I was going to leave, I was going to travel, and I was going to do it all alone. Not for a holiday, not for a couple of weeks, but for a full year. Backpacking through South and Central America before flying over to London, working and exploring parts of Europe. That is as far as I ever got in terms of any sort of detailed planning. There was no guidebook, no smartphones. Internet wasn't even really that accessible, not unless you count the cafes. So I had zero safety net. Just a flight in and a flight out 12 months later. Why alone? Well, it wasn't exactly a decision based on choice, more of a necessity. My friendship group at the time, there was no one really ready to make that level of commitment. And I can't blame them. Everyone is at different stages of life. To be honest, I never really felt ready myself, so I could understand their point of view. And there was many others, especially those that were within their professional careers, that thought I was acting crazy and rash. And at the time, I didn't know if they were right or wrong. I just knew it was something I needed to do. And there was only one way to find out. Now, before anything else, I want to discuss a little bit more into the why. Because it wasn't some lifelong dream at that time to travel the world. I was young. I'd been on only one previous trip prior to that, with a group of mates to Indonesia. Although, reflecting, maybe that's what started the itch. But it wasn't because I hated my job. There were parts of my job that I did actually enjoy. But about 6 months into working there full time, I remember looking ahead and realizing something. This wasn't just a job, but this was a path. A good path, sure. Work, promotion, more responsibility, maybe a house, maybe a family. The things most people are aiming for, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just wasn't ready to commit to that version of my life just yet. That version actually filled me with anxiety, which is a pretty clear indicator that something needed to change. So being in my early 20s, there were too many places I hadn't seen. And the more I thought about it, the more one question kept coming back. If not now, then when? Because life has a real habit of filling in that empty space. A career becomes a bigger career. A relationship becomes a family. 1 year becomes 5. So eventually, I stopped asking if it was the right time, as I came to realize there is no such thing as the right time. So I had landed in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, completely jet lagged. I had no idea what the hell I was doing. I had zero Portuguese. I had no sense of how anything worked, and I was all alone. I remember sitting in the bus, watching out the window as the city went past, just trying to put everything together and make sense of it all. The noise, the pace, the scale of it. And for the first time, I had this quiet thought. How the hell am I actually going to survive here? I don't even know how to ask for a bottle of water. I'm not even sure what the local currency is. How the hell was I going to navigate this country, let alone this continent? And it wasn't long before I made my first mistake. Quite a major one. The first night, I stayed up all night, partying until sunrise. I ended up on Copacabana Beach. It was the one thing the hostel staff explicitly told me not to do. Don't go out partying all night, and don't find yourself at Copacabana Beach in the morning. But here I was, and at the time, everything felt fine. I was sitting there with the group I'd been partying with, and we were watching the sunrise come up. Fantastic. And then I heard the gunshot. I didn't think much of it. Maybe I was a little bit too inebriated, but I kind of thought maybe it's fireworks. Maybe that's how they greet the sunrise here each morning. But as I turned around, I saw the police officer running down the street, firing his weapon at someone. Right there, in the first 24 hours of my year-long journey, this was happening. And I soon realised I wasn't listening to someone else's story anymore. I was in the thick of it, living it. Another aspect I want to talk about, which I feel most travel stories tend to skip over, is that it took me about a month to finally start feeling comfortable being alone. It was a first for me. Not a few days, not a week, but a month. A month of uncertainty, mistakes, and figuring everything out in real time. By the time I reached Chile, I had travelled through Brazil and Argentina. I had just enough broken Spanish to get from point A to point B, and just enough confidence to stop second-guessing every decision. And it was at this point I realised I didn't feel as anxious anymore. I was much more present. It wasn't a big moment, no breakthrough, just quiet change. And that stayed with me to this day. Because once you've built that version of yourself, the one that can handle things without a safety net, you don't lose it when you go home. It stays with you. And I guess that's what people mean when they talk about solo travel and self-development. So looking back, there are a few things that I wish I understood before I left. Not rules, just things that maybe would have made things a little easier. To begin with, it wouldn't hurt by learning some of the basics of the language of the country you're about to travel through. You only need to plan for the first 48 hours, just enough to land, to get where you're sleeping and settle. After that, everything will just start to make a little bit more sense as you move through it, in a way that it never would from home. Your first destination doesn't have to be anywhere impressive. It just needs to be forgiving. Somewhere where you can make mistakes without them becoming big problems. Because you will make mistakes. I made plenty. But one of the biggest mistakes you can make is judging your whole experience based on one bad day. Those days are just going to happen. Navigating the world by yourself can be really difficult at times. But it's no reason to just pack up and quit. They will pass. It's actually just part of the experience. And something else I didn't realize at the time until later reflecting. If you feel alone, the fastest way to stop feeling alone is to just surround yourself with other people going through the same thing. That's why hostels are important to begin with. Not because they're perfect, far from it. I mean, I've slept on the thinnest of mattresses, on nothing but floorboards, with 30 others snoring around me. So it's not because of that. It's because they remind you that you're not the only one that's trying to tackle all of this. And that at the time was more reassuring than what I gave it credit for. Okay, so at this point, I'd been traveling through South and Central America for about 8 to 9 months. I was meant to fly into London much earlier than I had. A friend was going to pick me up from Heathrow. I landed in late November and walked outside. And I just stopped in my tracks. Oh shit, I'm in the European winter. I was still in shorts and a singlet from Mexico. What the hell was I going to do with this? So I turned around, walked back into the airport, checked the departures board, and looked for anything that was leaving that night to Southeast Asia. And there it was, a flight to Thailand, and 6 hours later, I was on it. My decision making was far less serious and far less fearful at that stage of the trip. I stopped needing everything to make sense and just went with the flow. Not because I was fearless, because I had already seen what happened when I went with the flow and followed my gut. And everything had ended up quite well up until that point. So if you're there thinking about your first solo trip, I hope you're starting to understand the message. And I want to make this really clear to you. You don't need to feel ready. In fact, you likely never will be. You just need to leave. Because readiness isn't something that you're going to find before the trip. If I can leave with nothing figured out, travel through places I didn't understand, and build my way through it step by step, then I'm telling you, you can also. And somewhere between the fear and trepidation, you will be surprised at the version of yourself you're suddenly growing into and what you're capable of.